Hello, in this brief video I'd like to talk a little bit about what contextualization is and what it does. It's going to be very short, so don't worry. Darrell Whiteman, in the article you just read, defines contextualization as attempts to communicate the gospel in word and deed and to establish the church in ways that make sense to people within their local cultural context, presenting Christianity in such a way that it meets people's deepest needs and penetrates their worldview, thus allowing them to follow Christ and remain within their own culture. It's got a lot going on in that definition, but I like it. And the key word that comes across to me in that is meeting people's deepest needs and penetrating their worldview. So adapting the way we present, explain things, and live out our lives as well, so that the communication of the gospel meets people's deepest needs and penetrates their worldview. And this week we're going to be talking more about worldview, and we can see already there's a link somehow between contextualization and worldview. It's not the whole story, but at one level we want to see contextualization be happening in a way that penetrates the worldview of the people. Moreau, there are lots of definitions of contextualization, but Scott Moreau has another good one, and his is the process whereby Christians adapt the forms, content and practice of the Christian faith so as to communicate it to the minds and hearts of people with other cultural backgrounds. And the key word there to me is adapt. In contextualization, we're adapting the way we're communicating so that the message comes across as actually speaking to their needs, that it penetrates their worldview, that it speaks to their hearts, like that dagger into the heart that people felt that day that Peter stood up at Pentecost. That message was adapted. There are lots of ways of presenting the gospel, and we'll talk about them, but we want to present the gospel in word and deed, and perhaps even in sign, so that it comes across to people as relevant, as speaking to them, and so that eventually the church is built up in ways that reflect the local culture as well as God's values and principles and who He is and nature. Appropriate contextualization. How do we do it well? Well, lots of people's attempts at, oh dear, this was not so good, didn't expect that to happen. On this right hand side is the world, where we're at. So yeah, if you like, I'm in the world. Actually, I like to be over on the Bible side. Anyway, there you go. Can you move this? I bet you can't. No, you can't. Okay. So a lot of attempts to communicate the gospel come across from, well, do very well at landing solidly on the world side, as in they're really, as it were, highly contextualized, highly adapted to context, but not terribly biblically grounded. So you can have a message that speaks to people, but and it could even be sort of loosely a gospel message even, but its biblical grounding may be very weak, so that what you end up with is something really so diluted it's hardly recognizable as being sourced in Scripture. That's one way, not very good contextualization. Another way that people sometimes contextualize, and this is more evangelical and more kind of strong Bible college people tend to do this. They stay very close to the text, but never does the message really land into people's hearts, into their culture or their context. It hasn't been contextualized. People can't feel it as relevant for them. So that bridge is never built between the Bible and the world or the people. Good contextualization actually builds a bridge all the way from the message of the Bible, from the Scriptures, to people's hearts and lives. Maybe that shouldn't say the world, it should say people's hearts. It goes all the way. It lands, it's solidly grounded in Scripture, but it also lands and speaks like that dagger to the heart. And good contextualization. If you remember Paul Hebert's bucket here on the right hand side, if you think of that as all the levels of culture and a people's way of being, good contextualization affects every single level. It probably, at least in terms of the gospel message most speaks to the belief systems, the beliefs and ideas that people hold about the world, about spirits, about the future, about the present. But from that little layer of beliefs, it seeps up into behaviours. Behaviours start to change as beliefs change, and it also seeps down, penetrates down into the worldview to affect the deep level assumptions that underpin beliefs. So when people focus only on one level of contextualization and tell people, we'll go off to church now and we do these particular behaviors at church, you get people who look on the outside like they're Christians doing churchy things. They stop smoking, they stop drinking, they stop wearing makeup, they do all these legalistic things, and some of them are probably good things, but it doesn't penetrate down to either the belief level or the worldview level, and you get a kind of a Christo-paganism where people say they're Christians and think that they're Christians, but really their whole worldview and their value system, their belief system is largely drawn from other sources. So on Sunday they go to the church, and on Monday they go off to a spirit practitioner, a shaman, or Hoja, to get a charm or an amulet to protect them from evil spirits, or to get a curse made on somebody so that their daughter doesn't marry that particular man. Stuff like that. We've seen a lot of it. What we want to see in good contextualization, that was my ring, if that's not symbolic. What we want to see in good contextualization is every single level of culture being deeply transformed by the gospel. And that does not mean in the worldview, well, we'll talk about this more, but at the worldview level, it doesn't mean you get replacement of worldview. There isn't such a thing as a Christian worldview in this sense of worldview. People use worldview in other senses, in the philosophical sense, which is more actually talking about the middle layer of beliefs. We're talking about a deeper assumption level. But even at this deeper assumption, anthropological level of worldview, there is a transformation. There are changes in the patterning of assumptions and in the assumptions themselves. Hope that wasn't too complicated. The main thing is that good contextualization affects all levels of culture. Have a great rest of the class.